Now I know a lot of you may think I'm an idiot for buying a car like this, but it was actually quite a clever decision. No, it wasn't. Yeah, you could be right, but let me tell you why I think it was first. As you can see, the damage sustained to the Cayman in the crash is on the front left hand quarter, the windscreen and the interior. Minus the windscreen, everything else can be unbolted and fresh parts bolted on, so they're an easy repair. And I got this car at a fraction of the price at auction, but that's not the only reason why this was a clever decision. And with the damage being on the front end, it's probably the best scenario for this car because the engine is in the middle. So this is a mid-engine car. It's also rear-wheel drive, so you've got no prop shafts or front drive shafts. Which means all you're really relying on for the front is to keep you in a straight line and to provide coolant. Because although the engine's in the back of the Cayman, the coolant comes down to these front radiators. You'd have one on both sides. So although this will still cost a fair bit to fix, because it's Porsche mainly, if the engine was in the front and the engine had took on off, that could have then wrote the engine off and then it would have deemed the car unrepairable. Well, not unrepairable, just not really economic to repair. It'd cost too much. But because our flat 6 naturally aspirated engine is in the back of the Cayman, that means that that is okay. And this one starts and it sounds fantastic. That doesn't address the elephant in the room, and that is the front end damage. As we know, based on the last video, the subframe snapped, so that all needs to change. But luckily, we have a subframe. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to drop the old subframe, take all the front end suspension bits off, get them on the new subframe, get that back in, and then structurally in that aspect, the Porsche is actually okay. That wasn't why it's a Category S. So the Category S is that little fold there, but we'll address that when we come to fit the new wing. And that new second-hand subframe cost me £301, which isn't too bad. Another thing I have replaced is that lower control arm, and that was purely just to get the car moving, so let's add that to the board as well. And that cost me a total of £50, which isn't that bad either. But that's enough about pricing. Let's get the wheels off, get the Porsche up, and get that subframe off. A new place, a new home. For a while, let me feel alive. So I've got the axle stand under, but I'm not really happy with it because I've had to stick it on the pinch weld. I think it'll be okay. That's the jacking point. So other than that, the only other place really you can stick a jack stand is probably on the subframe, but we need to drop the subframe, so we can't really do that. It is sturdy enough, the car's not going anywhere, but I don't want to leave it on there too long because I don't want to crush that pinch weld, but at the minute it seems okay. Now the Cayman's up in the air and I've got the wheels off both sides. You can see on this one. On this side I did have to drop the underside to get the jack stand under because I couldn't get it on the lip without it snapping the underside. But as you can see, under most Porsches, from front to rear, they're full of plastic undertrays. And although they're really good for preserving the underside of your car, they're an absolute pain when it comes to working on anything underneath. So I'm going to get the rest of these trays off. They're just held on with Torx bolts and a few plastic nuts, and then we can crack on taking more stuff off. And I'll be honest, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm winging 90% of this, but I know them under trays need to come off. Well, it's off. So now the under trays off, you can see what I mean about it collecting stuff, and it's a bit grotty. Underneath isn't that bad. It's a little bit rusty where you'd expect on the thinner parts. That's full of cobwebs. That is actually the fuel tank because we're at the front of the car, and that's where it is on the Caymans. And you can see my little bodge repair to keep that control arm on, which you'll have seen in that video if you go and watch that now. So after assessing the subframe, I've realised to get that out I'm also going to have to drop the steering rack, and I'd rather not do that if I can avoid it. So to avoid that, we're going to do this. On the steering knuckle, we're going to take that tie rod out because that's connected to the steering rack. We're also going to have to come around the back, and the brake lines here, they will not come off because they're still connected to the body. So if I drop the subframe and leave that on, I'll snap all the brake lines. So I'm going to disconnect it from there. It's looking quite crusty, so I might change them if I can. Disconnect it from there, pinch the line to stop the fluid from leaking, and then we should be all right to drop it all at once. So after a good 10 minutes of hitting this nut, I realised it wasn't coming out without a fight. It was pretty seized in there. So I decided to turn the hub just enough so I can get a bit better access behind it. Get the blowtorch on the nut to heat the hub up to allow the hole to expand a little bit, and then give it another good whack with the hammer, and this broke it free. The good thing is, when I come to do the passenger side, because I've already had it off, this just came straight out. So now the steering rods are out, and obviously well, ironically actually, the crash side was a lot easier to get off than the driver's side, but I think it's because I've had it off before. I've then gone to the brakes, and a lot of under this car is actually quite rusty on the subframes, and just the brakes, the pipes, anything really. But because of how rusty it was, I couldn't get the brake line off the caliper, and I couldn't get it off the bracket. So in the end, I decided to just chop the brake line, and I'll replace that with a new one anyway. It's pretty rotted. But I've took that bracket off there with that bolt. I've undone the connectors for the plugs there and put the bolt back just so I know where it goes, because they connect to the body, and if you drop the subframe with them still on, you'll snap the connector and you'll rip the brake lines. But that will get changed, and I think I might change the flexies if I can get hold of some, because they're not in the best of condition, in all honesty. So now that the brake lines and the brake wear sensors are disconnected from both sides, we can get back under the car and start taking some of the bolts out to slowly lower the subframe. I've also decided that, for the sake of ease, I'm going to take the suspension towers off with them as well, because I don't want to try and split the ball joints and damage the ball joints, so then that's another thing I'm going to have to pay for, and you can't buy them separately. You've got to get them on the lower control arm, so that'll be another 100 quid. But taking the suspension off with the subframe actually isn't that difficult. If you come to the top and you pull out the plastics, you've got 3 bolts there. These are match marked. I'm going to make sure the opposite side's the same, and if not, I'll do it. So then when I stick them back on, I know where they go, because I think these are slotted. I think I'll disconnect the suspension from the top now actually, and in that way when we're under it, we can take the jack with us and we can slowly control it coming down, because if you do it from the top and it hangs from the suspension, it'll just drop. And just like I thought, they are slotted, and I think it's to help adjust the camber, but I'm not 100% sure. So if you do ever take a strut tower off a Cayman or a Boxster, I think it's the same. Make sure you match mark the bolts, so when you put them on, you know where they go, because there's a fair bit of adjustment there. So now the suspension's off, and you can see it's kind of just flopped out. I think it's the same on this side. Yeah. So now they're off, we need to get underneath and start taking off the bolts that hold the subframe on. Actually, before we do that, we need to take the bolts out for the power steering rack. I'm gonna try and get it so the rack stays up, but the subframe comes down, and we get the new one on, we'll bolt it all up back in the car. But yeah, there's only 2 bolts, so we'll get them off first, and then we'll drop the subframe, and hopefully the whole thing comes out. So the first thing we're going to remove is the power steering rack bolts. That's because if I don't do it now, I'll probably forget, and then I'll try and pull it out with the subframe, and then the subframe won't come out. Next, I'm going to go around the subframe and remove all the bolts that are holding the subframe to the body of the Porsche itself. After that, I've got a block of wood on the jack, get the jack underneath just to take some of the weight, and I'll try and slowly lower it down. This is when I realised this isn't going to come out the way it is. So I've kind of got the subframe off a little bit, but as you can see, it's kind of just hanging at the minute, so it's not connected to the car with bolts. But what is holding it up is these coolant pipes. These 2 on the front are stuck on a bracket on that, which you can't get off. And then down the back, you see the silver, it's stuck on there as well, so we need to disconnect them from both sides at the back, both sides at the front, and this subframe should drop. So to get these hoses off, there's a clip there for the top. Just prise it forwards. So, and then this should pull out. There's one off. Same for the bottom. Prise it forwards. And then pull the hose. And there's 2 off. So taking these rear coolant pipes off didn't really go to plan, because I got them separated enough for the coolant to come out, but I couldn't get them out of each other, so the coolant went everywhere. It went all down my arm, all over the floor. But eventually I got them separated, and what little bit was left in the pipe actually came out. Well, safe to say I made more of a mess than I intended on doing, because I did have a bowl down there to catch the coolant, and it caught a fair bit, but the rest is all over the mats. But the good thing is now, hopefully, with those coolant pipes being disconnected on both sides, I think it was 6 in total, 2 on the back, 2 on the left, 2 on the right, should be able to drop that subframe now, and if not, it'll be something else that's holding it up. So now I've dropped the subframe, but you can see it's still hanging on by this coolant crossover pipe. That's because this aluminium pipe goes over the power steering rack, and that's what's holding it up. So I'm going to give the power steering rack a little bit of a wiggle just to free up the coolant pipe, and then that is the subframe finally down. So after wrestling with it for a while, we finally got it out. Now you can see what it is I was actually fighting with. So this is the front subframe. These two pipes are the coolant pipes, and those two pipes are also the coolant pipes that go to the back. The issue is these clip onto the subframe there, and there's one over there with a leveling sensor on it, but I've took that off. And they're the reason why I couldn't get it off after just taking the bolts out. Because realistically, other than the power steering rack, which every front subframe will have, usually you just take the bolts out, drop that with the rack, or you leave the rack in and whatever else. Usually your coolant pipes don't run around like that, because when your engine's in the front, all your coolant pipes run around out the engine into the radiator and back straight into the engine. With the Cayman, they come out the radiators, across the subframe, down the back of the car, then to the engine. So that made it a bit more awkward, but at least it's off. The other thing as well is with the Cayman only being rear wheel drive, we don't have any front drive shafts, which I think also helped in terms of it not being a massive pain to try and get out, because then you got to start competing with engine mounts, gearbox mounts and all that jazz. So I'm happy, but at the same time, I hate the feeling of coolant all over your hands. It feels all greasy and horrible. But now that the subframe's off, we need to transfer everything. So this side is actually the okay side, but you can see how corroded that is. And that's why the side that snapped actually did snap. And I think one thing that may accelerate the corrosion between the subframe and the lower control arms is you have steel washers and you have steel bolts. And when steel and aluminium go together, because they're two different metals, they react, and that can cause, well, oxidation, or it can cause them to gall up, and when you try and get the bolt out, you snap the tails because they basically fuse together. But like I just said, so we need to get that arm off, we need to get the sway bar underneath, which is this bit, we need to get that off, all the coolant pipes and those two brace bars at the back, and transfer it over to the nice shiny new subframe. And you can already see the massive difference between that one and the one I've just took off the car. But now that the old one's out, the only thing left to do really is to start, well, unbolting everything and putting it on the new subframe. So the first thing I want to do is remove the coolant pipes, then the one remaining drop link, because I snapped the other one trying to get the subframe off, and then I can finally cut off the temporary repair that I made to keep the Cayman up on its wheels. So now that I've took my temporary fix off, you can see just why it was on there in the first place. The tails have snapped quite badly to the point of where the bolt, even if you got it tight, will still come out, and I found that one out the hard way. This lower control arm bolt is just as corroded as the opposite side, which makes sense really, but to get this out, I don't think the hammer's going to do it, and I'm worried that if I keep hitting it, I'm going to damage the nut, so there's only really one option I can go with. Well, I think it's safe to say aluminium and steel definitely don't like each other, or they like each other a bit too much. Because this is aluminium, the bolt is steel, and can I get that out? Absolutely not. You can see on the tails, that's probably why the other one snapped. There's not much material there at all, and the more I hit it, the more that's flaking off. So I think my best option really at this point is to just snap the tails, because I'm not using the subframe anyway, and hope I don't damage or bend that bolt. Now that I've snapped that end, you can see just how corroded the threads are to the subframe. It's basically welded itself together, and that's why I couldn't get the bolt to come through. But now I'll do the other side and try and get the bolt out that way, get this lower control arm off. The only thing left is the sway bar, this, and then the plastic clamps on either side, the mid braces, and they're all ready for that. You can already see that may have been cleaned, but it's so much better than the one I've just took off. I managed to get the bolt out enough just to chip the ears on the subframe, because I'm not getting that bolt all the way through it. That's seized in. I just won't be able to, so I'm going to pull it out, and I'm going to get it out. I'll figure it out after the fact. Yes. Yeah. At least it's off. If you're ever going to do work on a Porsche Cayman subframe, whether that's the lower control arms or anything else, be prepared to buy another subframe, because those ears are ridiculous. This is the side I've just had to snap to get that out, and you can see there all the aluminium's all galled up, it's all corroded, and no wonder I couldn't spin the bolt or anything like that. It also doesn't help that on this lower control arm you've got these big steel washers with a big steel bolt that go to the middle, and all the weight is on that, and I still can't move that bolt, so I don't know how I'm getting it out, but I'll figure it out. But that's the big bits removed from the subframe. Now it's only really, hopefully, the easier stuff to get off, so the rest of it shouldn't take too long. So now it's just a case of removing those two nuts. They're actually on bolts on the back. Same with those two, bolts on the back. That one I've just showed you, bolt on the back, and get these two braces off, and then that old subframe is stripped down. So now that the subframe's fully stripped down, you can see that all the components on it are a bit rusty and a bit crusty. So after a lick of paint and a bit of a clean, they look a lot better. It's now a few days later, so I could let the paint on the parts are painted dry, and I think they look a lot better now that they've got a fresh coat of paint, because that sway bar was so crusty, and the brace bars in the middle, they were practically all orange. But now they'll be protected for a little bit longer with this paint. But now that all that's finished, the only thing left to do really is start building up the new subframe. And in the process of removing the old one, I did manage to snap one of the drop links on the right hand side. I think, where is it? There it is. That's the bit that pops out. You could probably pop it back in, but at that point it's not really structurally sound. So I got some fresh drop links for both sides. So while we're in here, we'll change them on both sides as well, so we know they've been done. And those front drop links cost me £33.44, which isn't too bad for a pair. But anyway, let's get the subframe built up and a Porsche back on its wheels. So I'm going to start with the sway bar, making sure that the bushings sit just right in the subframe so they don't get pinched on the wrong side. I'm going to stick the brackets on the top, 2 bolts through the bottom, 2 nuts on the top. Then I'm going to put the coolant hose clamp in, that just sits on the side and bolts in from underneath. And then I can just clip the coolant hoses in and the 2 bolts on the top, tighten them, and that is literally the subframe built up. We can get it back in the car. So that's now most of the subframe built up, which looks a lot better because it's all on a shiny subframe. I've cleaned the pipes a bit. I know on these Caymans especially, you're supposed to change these pipes when you get the subframe off because it's a pain of a job. And apparently they leak between the rubber and the aluminium, but I don't have any X pipes. Mine, as far as I'm aware, are okay, and I think it's just an added expense I don't need to do. So I know a lot of you will probably be in the comments saying, should have changed the X pipes, whatever else, but the crossover pipes, sorry, but I don't think it's necessary in this situation. And if it starts to drip or leak, then fair enough, I'll admit my fault, but as it is, these look okay. There's no holes, there's no corrosion, there's no pitting. I think it's all good, but like I said, most of it's built back up now. The only thing left really is the suspension arms on either side, which we can fit, but for the sake of the weight, I might fit this first and then fit them when it's on the car, because it'll be easier to fit them after the fact than it will be to do it right now. So because of that, let's clip 2 under the car and we'll try and get this back on. So with me not fitting the subframe with the suspension stuff, I think it was a really good idea, because this is awkward enough as it is. Because of all the coolant hoses and everything on top of the subframe, as well as all the things still on the chassis of the car, like the power steering rack and the fuel tank straps and all that, it's a very awkward process to get it up and to get it in. But while I'm struggling away, if you could do me a huge favour and go down and click that subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it, because it does really help the channel out. And as you can see, we are slowly growing, and I think this Porsche project is going to be an interesting one, if you don't think so already, because there's a lot going on and I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. But eventually I got the subframe in, got it all bolted up, and now we can carry on. Well, subframe's back in. That was a challenge to say the least, because when you got one side up, the other side fell, vice versa. Bolts weren't going in, it's just an absolute pain. But it's back in. We'll start plugging some of the hoses back in before we put anything else on, and after that we'll get both sides on with the suspension towers, the hubs, the discs, and the lower control arms, and hopefully when we lower the Porsche, it'll be sat on its wheels for the first time since the crash without any Jubilee clips or ratchet straps holding it up. Now I don't know about you, but I think those painted brace rails and that new subframe looks so much better. So now I can get the suspension strut in, get that bolted up, then get the new lower control arm in, get that bolted up with a lot of copper ease, get the other control arm in, get that bolted up, get the tie rods in, get that bolted up, get the new drop links in, get them bolted up, and then that is that done. So that is now the passenger side all back on, and it's nice and tight. there's no rocking, everything's down as it should be. I haven't tightened the lower control arm yet because you need to drop the car before you do that. So if I tighten it now, when the arm comes up and the car comes down, it'll put a lot of stress on that bushing there, and then it'll probably wear down and rip or whatever else. But everything is as good as on, apart from the brake lines, and that's because this line on the back here, that's snapped. You can see it slowly dripping. The flex pipe is very corroded on both the front and the rear, so I need to try and get that rear brake line off to change the flex pipe. But the good thing is, if I can't get that rear line off, if you follow the line up and around the back, you can see when it comes through, it literally just goes to there. So if I have to, I can unbolt it from there, make a whole new hard pipe from there down onto the flex pipe on the back of the chassis, put a new flex on, make a new hard line from the flex to the caliper. Then that way we can get the brake pipe on, and we can kind of have a bit of peace of mind to know that that brake pipe's being changed. The only hard thing is if the opposite side is the same on the driver's side, which I assume it is, I've got to go under everything I've just put back on to make a whole new brake line. So hopefully I can do it without having to do that, but if I can't, then it is what it is. But like I said, that's the passenger side on. I still need to get the driver's side on. But the good thing is, it's literally just a mirror image of the passenger side, so I'll get that on off camera because there's no point in me recording it for you to see it twice. And I'll come back to you when that's on, and we can get that a little bit closer to getting the car back on its wheels. I've also decided to slap a load of copper ears on all the bolts, because if I ever have to take these off again, I am not fighting with them the way I did on the old one, because I'll probably snap the subframe and I'll have to do all of this again. But anyway, let's get that on there. So there it is, this side's on now, and I've done a little bit extra. I did record it, my camera wasn't recording, so I put a hard line on this side, and I've managed to fix the flex pipe as best I can, but I think I'm going to change that, because I've got a new line there. I'll put a new brake line in on the flex, and I might even do the hard line on the back, if that becomes a problem. And I've also had to do the opposite side, because they were both just as seized as each other. But because I've changed the flex lines, that means that there's now air in the brakes, so we need to bleed the brakes to get the air out, so you don't get a soft, spongy pedal. And then when we bled the brakes, we can drop the car, and that will be the Cayman back on its wheels with a solid subframe. And because I'm on my own, I'm going to use a power bleeder. So what this does is you fill it with brake fluid, then you connect it to the brake fluid reservoir with this quick release connect and the adapter to go on the top. You then pump the power bleeder to pressurize it. This then provides constant pressure on the braking system as if someone's pumping the brake pedal. Then you go down to the calipers, bleed both sides of the caliper because the Cayman has 2 bleed nipples. Watch all the fluid come through, make sure there's no air bubbles, tighten the bleed nipples back up, and then go back to the top of the car to finish the process. So now we've bled the brakes, but as you can see on the power bleeder, there's still pressure in it. So if I took that cap off now, it'll spray brake fluid everywhere. So what you need to do is on the back, you need to depressurize it. It spits all the air out. And now that way I can take this grip release off and it won't spit brake fluid everywhere. I can take that off, swap it with the cap, clean it up and put the cap back on. So that's both brakes bled as you've just seen. The only thing left to do now is to get the wheels on, get the car back on the floor, and then I've got to clean up because the place is an absolute mess. And there it is, the Cayman's down, back on the subframe without any Jubilee clips or stupid ratchet straps, and nothing has snapped yet. But it looks a lot better now. I now know that it's safe instead of that crusty old subframe there. And considering we've had the whole front end off alignment wise, we've actually not done too bad, because when you look at it, that wheel is still sitting true and straight. That wheel is still true and straight to the body line, and if you come round to the driver's side and look in there, you can see the steering wheel is still flat. And I'm not naive, I know it'll probably need an alignment at some point because we have messed a lot of the suspension up, but for that, I'll take that. I've also left the plastics and the under trays off purely because when we come to fix this side, we put the new radiator on, the new rad pack and all that, we're gonna need to fill the car with coolant, and when I fill the car with coolant, I wanna make sure that I can see any leaks from underneath. If I put the under trays on, it won't leak through, so it'll look like it's fine, but it could have a drip or something could be leaking underneath and I wouldn't know. So I've left them off When we've done that and I know all that's good, then I'll stick them back on and I can leave them on then. But fixing that is going to be in the next video because that needs to be done before we can do anything else, and then we can move on to the interior once the windscreen's gone. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. If you want to see how we get on with the Cayman, hit the subscribe button down below to follow along with the build, and while you're there, you might as well hit the like button. That's if you've liked this. If you've got this far, I assume you've liked it because you wouldn't have stayed around. I've now got to clean all this mess up because it looks like a mechanical bomb went off, but that's what was necessary to get that back on its subframe and back on its wheels. But again, that's going to be it for this video, guys. If you like what you see, remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notifications bell so you get an update every time I post a video, and I'll see you in the next one.